We've all heard of the gradual release of responsibility of I do and model, we do together, you do collaboratively or with a partner, and you do independently. But what does that you do independently look like within Be Glad? Let's find out through the individual tasks. Individual tasks were developed by Marcia Brechtel and Linnea Haley, the co-creators of Project GLAD. The idea is to start from whole group and I do, modeling and working together, to we do through our team tasks, and ultimately to you do as an individual. In the individual tasks, we ask students to recreate some of the charts, embed some of the learning that they've learned throughout the course of the unit in a task that they themselves create, that's theirs individually. This is after they've created the team tasks with their peers and their teammates. Now it's time for them to show their learning individually. Individual tasks can be completed in a similar way as team tasks, where you create a menu. Students can choose from the menu what they want to show individually and independently. As a teacher, you can decide what should be included within the individual tasks. For example, you might say that you want students to create their own input chart with new relevant information from the unit. You might ask students to do a piece of writing. You may ask students to create a new poem. That might be using a poetry frame, or it may be writing something on their own. You might ask them to create their own sentence patterning chart. Any of the strategies that you've modeled whole group and that have then been completed as team tasks can then become an individual task. One fun way to integrate the individual tasks is to create a must-do and may-do menu for students. For example, you might say to students that they must create these 3 particular charts. Those can be application tasks where students need to create something on their own based on what they've learned. They might extend their learning by researching a new related topic. On the may-do side, you can ask students to choose 2, 3, or more from a list of particular strategies that you want them to include on their individual task and to build into their portfolio. Here's some examples of individual tasks. This student, for example, created a graphic organizer input chart on the front, and within has a piece of writing. This was one of the must-do tasks, and then created a chant, built a sentence patterning chart, has a cognitive content dictionary, as well as a process grid built into the task. This student decided to create a couple of literacy reinforcers and put them on the front of their individual task portfolio. Inside, they decided to write 2 poems, included a narrative story, as well as some informative writing. So a variety of tasks can be included within the individual portfolio based on the requirements of the teacher, as well as what the student chooses and is interested in including into their portfolio. This student, Brandon, a kindergartner, included found poetry, an ABC book page, and an action plan within his individual portfolio. Individual tasks can also be compiled and then put together into a class-made book. For example, this class wrote the important book about the colonies. Each person wrote a page, made an illustration, and then the teacher put it together into a class-made big book. Each student created a page and incorporated important content utilizing the whole class big book frame. In this example, the students used a poetry frame based on the tune of Bingo. They then created their own poems and songs utilizing the key content being studied. There's not just one way to do individual tasks. The idea is to allow students to extend the information that they've been learning, to synthesize what they've learned, what they're interested in, perhaps to do some research about those topics that they find especially interesting and exciting. Have some fun. Find different ways to put together these individual tasks and allow students to show what they know. Now let's see individual tasks in action in the classroom. Now that we've reached the end of our unit, we've moved from doing some activities whole class to doing team tasks where you worked on recreating some of these pieces in small groups. And now we're going to move to doing individual tasks. Let's say that and do that together. Ready? Individual tasks. This is when you're showing what you know. Now, you'll notice that we have a must-do list and a may-do list. For the must-do, you have to do all of these things, okay? So one is we're going to do the graphic organizer input chart. Everybody point to our graphic organizer input chart. Yes, the idea is you're going to recreate this chart visually. Another one is the pictorial input chart. Everybody point to the pictorial input chart. Yes, same thing. You're going to recreate this with all this important information about Virginia. Now, I'm going to give you an option though. If you want to create a new pictorial input chart about another colony, let's say, for example, the Massachusetts colony, because we also studied that particular state, then you can create a pictorial on that. Then you're also going to have some informative writing where you can create a summary, perhaps something that we've read. Narrative writing where you're going to create a story, and a poem similar to what we have done together. Now, you can use a poetry frame if you'd like. It could be the Yes of Course poetry frame. It could be a Here There poem. It could be a boogaloo. The various types of poems and songs and chants that we've done together, you can also write. You also have a list of may-do activities. You need at least 2 from this list. Let's take a look. The first is the process grid. Point to the process grid, everyone. Yes. Now, you can, same thing, recreate this, but if you'd like to add information about a different colony that we haven't studied yet, or a different state that we haven't studied in depth, you can do that. You could also do a mind map in preparation for your informative writing. Where's our mind map, everyone? Point to it. Yes, right there. So you would create your own about another topic that you're going to write about. We have our sentence patterning chart back there. You can also recreate that if you would like to. Or our cognitive content dictionary, which we have over here, where you're going to decide on a particular word that you want to study, make some predictions, come up with the final meaning, and create a sentence. Now, let me show you what this looks like. Some students have done it this way, where they created a foldable. This student chose to do a chant or a poem, the cognitive content dictionary, the process grid, and the sentence patterning chart. So you're going to decide which ones of the may-do that you want, and of course, you'll have to include all of these must-do. Now, don't panic, we'll have some time to get this done. As you're finishing your team tasks and wrapping those up, you can move to begin developing your individual tasks.
What I did for one of my individual tasks is I made this graphic organizer about one of the novels we've been reading. It includes the character traits for most of the characters that appear in the story, and to describe the way they act and how they are. I also drew many symbols to symbolize the key details in the story. On the back, there is a summary I wrote, and I tried to get as many points as I could on the rubric in order to get a good grade.
Very nice, thank you. Excellent work, that was fantastic. Okay, next up.
So I have my informative writing on the back, and it's like the summary of the story. These are my, the symbols of what happens, or what's important inside the story. The whale, the flag, and the marble. There's a description for it on the bottom, and I tried to add a lot of color. And there's all these character traits. So we have our main character at the top. I put them in boxes so it's easier for people to read, and yeah.
Very nice. Awesome, thank you, that was perfect. Very good.